And here we are, it is the very first day of Pauper Commander January. What is that? Every day in the month of January, I'm going to be showing off a different Pauper Commander deck that you all watching can enjoy, use, get ideas to build your own Pauper Commander deck. This is a very fun format, so I want to kind of give it more exposure and get more people playing the format. If you don't know the rules of Pauper Commander, there's a link in the description to a video that I also made with a very short tutorial about how it functions. But to keep things brief, pretty much any uncommon creature, regardless if it's legendary or not, can be your commander, and then all cards in the 99 need to be commons. For this deck, this is Landfall. This is a deck of my own creation. I'm sure that a lot of people have made this deck, but this is my personal build of it, and it is running Tatiova, Steward of Tides as its commander. This card is pretty cheap, only costing 2 green and 1 blue mana, and all land creatures have flying, and whenever a land enters the battlefield, as long as you have 7 or more lands, up to any land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste, and they remain a creature permanently. Even if Tatiova leaves the battlefield, all it does is remove the ability for them to have flying, but they're still land creatures, so they're still 3/3s with or without her. And so a special thing with Pauper Commander is there's not that many ways to deal with border creatures. Crypt Rats is like really the only commonly played thing. There's a few other board wipes, but they're very niche and narrow. So most of the time you only know about Crypt Rats, as far as this goes, so our lands are mostly safe, leading us to have mostly only lands in our deck and ways to put lands onto the battlefield, because you don't really need to run that many creatures because our creatures are just our lands. So let's go over the card by card. As I mentioned before, our creature pool is kind of narrow. They're pretty much only used for ramping, or like to bounce our lands back to our hand so we can keep getting our landfall triggers. I'm going to keep saying landfall even though technically it isn't landfall, but it is pretty much in everything except the word. Anyway, so this is a ramp deck, obviously, because we want to keep putting lands onto the battlefield to trigger our Tatiova repeatedly and repeatedly. So in order to do that, we are playing a lot of ramp cards. So we have Coiling Oracle, which is kind of his ramp, kind of draw. ETBs, you reveal a top card, land goes onto the battlefield, otherwise you put the card in your hand. So it's kind of just a nice little, you either get a land to ramp up, or you get a card that's one of your interaction, your removal, stuff like that. We're playing a pretty basic ramp passage, like Cultivate's pretty common, Explore, draw a card, play an extra land. Fall Wanderings is very good in this deck. Normally it only switches for 1 basic land, but because we're using so much ramp spells, we're going to have a pretty big graveyard. So we're going to be hitting that threshold very easily, which lets us put 3 basic lands from our library straight onto the battlefield, and that's 3 triggers on Tatiova, which is really good. Farseek just lets our force, which also helps us get our dual lands, because there's a couple dual lands in Pauper, the Snow Land and the ones from Dominar United, that do have land types, so Farseek can't search us out, so you can have access to both colors with this. Go from the assets, since we are a ramp deck, it's not too uncommon we'll be able to kick this, which lets us put 2 basic lands instead of just 1, especially late game, it's very nice. Ghost Spiral, draw and ramp. Journey of Discovery, another one, we can either search the library 2 basic lands, put them on our hand, but we can also entwine it to be able to play 3 lands instead of just 1 in a turn, which is very good, especially late game. And since we're ramping so much, we'll have a pretty good chance to entwine. Kusama Suite's another basic ramp card. Cross and Restore are pretty much a way to do a lot of ramping by untapping stuff, as well as untapping our land creatures after we use them for battle, so we can still have like blue mana up for counter spells and stuff like that. Nature's Lore, same thing as Farseek. This is Pilgrimage, switch to basic force, put them on the battlefield. This nice basic ramp. Rampant Growth, more basic ramp. Sacred Tribe Elder, one of our creatures where you can sack it to put a basic land onto the battlefield. Pretty nice, especially once we have Tatiova and our 7 lands, you can always go into any basic land and get a trigger off of it. Spring Blue Druid, ETBs, you sacrifice a land and search 2 basic lands and put them onto the battlefield, so a way to get 2 landfall triggers for the price of 1. Stone Cedar Hyphalant, pretty much whenever land comes under play, you untap it, and you can tap Stone Cedar to untap a target land. So because we're playing so many lands, we can keep untapping and tapping her to just ramp repeatedly. 3 Visits is another way to get force, pretty much same reasons we're playing Farseek and Nature's Lore. And then we have a Landfall Enablers, which is pretty much things that kind of force landfall to happen. So crop rotation, we sacrifice a land and we replace it with any other land, which helps us get to our indestructible lands like Darksteel Citadel or the indestructible dual land from Modern Horizons. Dreamscape Artist is another way to kind of get 2 landfall triggers in 1 turn for just 2 and a blue. You discard a card, sacrifice land, and you get 2 basics, which pretty much translates to pay 3, make 2 3/3 creatures for flying. Very good. Ghostly Flicker, this targets lands or creatures, so we can kind of just blink the stuff that gives us landfall triggers as well as the lands themselves, especially after we attack with them to get even more land triggers. Very nice, very powerful. How is just another 2-for-1 land ramp card, nothing too special about that. That's basics though, unlike crop rotation. Land Scout, we're playing like only a couple cards like this because they can be kind of bricky, just have to put a land directly onto the battlefield. Pulse Murasa, return a target creature or land from a graveyard to its owner hand, you gain 6 life. This would be very important because it lets us recycle all our fetch lands, which give us 2 landfall triggers instead of just 1. Tribe Scout, another tap to put on target land, same with Skilled Herbalist. and same with Skyside Ranger. There's not too many Pauper cards that have landfall abilities, so only playing a couple, pretty much the ones we can be playing, which is Sporeman, which whenever land enters the battlefield, you put a 1/1 token, so we're getting both a 3/3 flyer with our land we put on the battlefield, as well as a free 1/1. More ways to kind of keep stuff protected, have combat damage, stuff like that. And then we have Territorial Scythe Cat, which pretty much land enters the battlefield, it gets a 1/1 counter, and it has trample, so it can become a massive threat with how much we're ramping and playing our stuff. Because we're playing so much ramp, we're kind of skimped out on mana rocks in favor of just more ramp and interacts and stuff like that. So we're only playing Arcane Signet and Bonder's Ornament, because Bonder's Ornament is kind of like one of like, you put slot into like almost every Pauper Commander deck, because it's a draw engine and it's a free mana rock, taps for any color. Well, not free, but it taps for any color. And because our pool of creatures is so slim, it opens up to have a lot of counter spells to ensure our stuff is safe. And counter spells are very useful because it prevents stuff like Trip Rats, which is one of the ways this deck can crumble. So playing 12 counter spells, you can play by more or less depending on what your preference is. I kind of viewed, I think 12 is a good number. I've been enjoying 12. So playing cancel, just target the counter spell of course. Disruption Protocol, just it's 2 mana to counter any spell. It's pretty much it's just same as counter spell, but you either tap an untapped artifact or you pay 1. So you usually pay 3, especially in this deck. Flash counter just counters the target instant spell. Lose focus because we're ramping so much, we can replicate it pretty easily to copy it, so that's pretty nice. Muddle Elixir just counter target instant sorcery spell. It can also tutor if we really need it to. There's not too many 2-drops you would tutor for, except like maybe like one of the 2 mana ramp spells, but it's very unlikely. Negate just counter target creature spell. Spell enough just counter spell, but if you have 5 left life, you draw a card, just an added bonus. And we do start with 30 life, so it's not impossible for that to happen. Stoic Rebuttal, just target counter spell, but we're not really ever going to have the Metalcraft, but it's still just good to have a blanket counter spell. Thought Collapse is another blanket counter, and they also mill. Unwind is 3 mana, it's not popping up, there we go. Counter target non-creature spell, and you untap 3 lands, which this also helps you untap your creature lands if you play with lands that aren't creatures yet. And then you find your Villain's Lair, just counter spell, discard 2 cards, draw 2 cards. I think it's a very fun counter spell, very versatile, I like this card a lot. For the regular lands, we're not playing too many fancy ones, like Darksteel Citadel is indestructible, which is also why we were playing Tanglepool Bridge, which are very good because we have 3/3 indestructible flyers. Also, like the Tangled Islet has the Forest subtype, which is why we're playing stuff like that. Simic Growth Chamber, just because being able to bounce lands is very good, and then we have a land that can tap for 2 mana. Mystic Sanctuary, kind of the same thing. It helps us recycle our ramp spells to get even more lands onto the battlefield. Since we're ramping so much, we have a lot of lands, which lets Quandra Campus scry 1 pretty easily. Moving on a little bit, we're going to look at some cards that bounce our lands back to our hands so we can keep getting our landfall triggers. Capsize is one that's recurable. It does cost 6 mana, but we are pretty mana heavy. Just return target permanent to its owner's hand. It can be used as removal, but more often we're going to want to be using it to bounce our lands to put them back onto the battlefield next turn. Daze is another counterspell. We might not be able to counter something, especially in Pauper Commander when there's a lot of ramp and mana rock and stuff like that, mana dorks. But the important thing is we can return an island rather than paying its mana cost, which lets us in turn get another landfall trigger. Even if we don't counter the spell, we would try to counter. Deprive, kind of the same thing. You return a land you control and to counter the target spell, especially with stuff like Simic Growth Chamber, we can get 2 landfall triggers for the price of 1. It does put you back on mana a little bit, but we're ramping so much it might not even matter. Fathom Seer, we'll pretty much only be playing it for its morph cost, we're not going to be playing it directly. You morph it, and the morph it face up, we return 2 islands, which gives us 2 extra landfall triggers for later. Plus, we get to draw 2 cards as an added bonus. Gus, but I think this card's actually banned in regular Pauper, but perfectly legal in Pauper Commander. You can return 2 islands to draw 2 cards, basically, or you can pay 5 mana, which we're not really ever going to do, because you want lands back in our hand to play them again, to make them into creatures. Snap, same thing, you return target creatures, so we can turn on land, and we untap 2 more lands, so we get value, untap lands after combats, and we get more access to more landfall triggers. So Atami Cloud Skater, one of our premier draw engines, because for 2 mana we turn a land we control the hand and draw a card and discard a card. So it puts a land back into our hand to landfall again while letting us loot. And last we have Tidal Bowl, which let us return an island we control to its hand instead of paying the mana cost to tap or untap target creature. That's not going to be too relevant. Maybe in some cases against like Voltron decks it could be useful if they're trying to attack into you, or to ensure they don't attack into you rather. But more often than not we're just using it to get a land back into our hand. And before we go to the fence, then just talk about removal, just kind of artifact and enchantment removal as far as real other things. So Broken Bond, sorry, target artifact and enchantment, but you can put a land onto the battlefield after you do so, which is why we're playing it. It is a sorcery, so it's generally weaker, but because of the extra land we get, I am running it. Frogify just makes something a 1/1 vanilla. Same with Kasmina's Transformation. These are the only 2 actual removal spells, so we can turn a problematic commander into a 1/1. Nature's Claim, just a straight target artifact enchantment. Same with Wilt and Witness Protection, just another removal spell in the same vein as Frogify and Kasmina's Transmutation. And now we move to the backbone of the deck, the Fetch lands. We're playing pretty much all the Panoramas you can replay, as well as all the ones from New Capenna. So pretty much these give you 2 landfall triggers because you get a landfall trigger, you pay 1, you sack it to add whatever land you need. Use either a forest or land, whatever you need at the time. And that gives us 2 landfall triggers and 1 land. But the really good ones are the new Capenna ones, because they enter the battlefield, the creature becomes a land, they sacrifice themselves, you immediately get the 2nd landfall trigger from the 2nd land entering, and you get some accidental life gain, which is pretty nice. So this means you get 2 landfall triggers for the price of 1, because you get 2 lands entering the battlefield and make 2 other lands in the 3/3 flyers. Very powerful, very good. And in Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, Rope Landscape, they're just, you sacrifice them to add a land onto the battlefield. And that's the deck. It is very powerful, it's very good, it can handle very well, it can ramp very easily, it can counter very easily. It's pretty hard to take care of the lands once they become creatures. And even then, you ramp so hard that Tatiova, you can almost guarantee still be safe, because when you try to cast her, you have your mana ready to counter someone. And then if she leaves the battlefield, you still have 3/3 creatures, and you have so much land for how much you're ramping, you can just cast her again really easily. Very consistent, very powerful, one of my favorite decks I've built. There'll be plenty of other decks with very different strategies, but we open up with a ramp one because, I mean, it's Simic. Simic's always going to be good, even in Pauper. What are you going to do about it?